Hello and welcome to RWR Plays TEW 2020. This is WCW Lives On Chapter 39 of the series. We are well on our way now to WCW Starrcade, just 3 episodes of Nitro, which includes this one, until we get to the big pay-per-view of the year. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Give us a subscribe if you haven't already done so to continue to follow along with this series, and of course if you do like this particular episode, give us a like as well. All of that is really appreciated. We're going to recap very quickly what happened on last week's show to start with. And last week's episode of Nitro was one of my favourites to do, I should say. I felt like there was loads of good stuff going on, big matches and major story developments throughout the show, and it just was a really fitting kind of first step on the road to Starrcade, which as I said, it was one of the favourite ones for me to write up and to kind of demonstrate to you. In terms of notable happenings, we saw Bill Goldberg storm to the ring at the beginning of the show and demand a match against Rick Steiner after Steiner had cost Goldberg the final of the Starrcade series against Rick's brother Scott at Uncensored. Rick Steiner then showed no fear in the face of the demand and welcomed the news when it came that Bischoff had accepted Goldberg's demand for a match in the main event of the show. Then during the match itself, Rick Steiner suckered Goldberg in and hit him with a steel chair to win a deliberate disqualification after just a few moments of action before taking Goldberg out with the chair, hitting him on multiple occasions and exploiting Goldberg's potential concussion from the previous night. We also on the show saw Vampiro and his Gothic collective seemingly take out Sean O'Haire in a 3-on-1 attack, which concluded with them destroying O'Haire's ankle when they sandwiched it in a metal folding chair and Prodigy stamped on it. We saw Sting defeat Lance Storm in a match that had been booked following Storm's involvement in Sting's match with Mike Awesome at Uncensored, and during the match, Awesome was prevented from getting involved when Flair came out to even the odds, allowing Sting to take victory. We saw Eddie Guerrero return to WCW when the Jarrett administration were outnumbering the Filthy Animals in a beatdown after a 6-man tag match. We also saw the return of Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk to go after the Headhunters who had attacked them a couple of weeks previous. And finally, Scott Steiner cut a promo saying that his challenge for Booker T's WCW title is finally on and predicting that he will be the new WCW champion. So loads of stuff that took place on Nitro last time around. Now we're going to get to Nitro and Saturday Night in just 1 second, but before that, another little plug for our podcast, The Random Wrestling Review, which has now been running for about 140 episodes and reviews random shows from across history. We've done events from 1984 all the way through to the current year. We've done every single WrestleMania, so if your bag is WrestleManias and the big shows that have happened in WWF history, well, we have done for all 40 of the WrestleManias, including double shows for the ones that had 2 nights. We've done loads of SummerSlams, Rumbles, we've done WCW shows, we've done ECW shows, we've done NWA shows, we've done AEW shows, we have done NXT shows, we've done all kinds of different stuff. Plus we have other shows that we do in between our main episodes, which vary in terms of what they include. So there's all kinds of variety and stuff over there. Long episodes, short episodes. Go over and take a look. We're available on all the major podcast apps. The Random Wrestling Review podcast. Anyway, let's get back to WCW Lives On and this week's episode of WCW Nitro. So we are in Connecticut for this particular episode of Nitro, the Oakdale Theatre. So we've moved from across from one side of the country to the complete other side of the country. And the show begins with Jerry Lawler and Mike Tenay sitting at the broadcast position. And Mike Tenay has updates on 2 men who were hurt in last week's show. First of all, he provides an update on Goldberg's condition following both the spear into the steel chair that happened at Uncensored and then being taken out with another steel chair by Rick Steiner on last week's episode of Nitro. He says that Goldberg has not been cleared to return to action this week and has therefore been told by Eric Bischoff to stay home to prevent any chance of further damage being done and extending his time out of action. To encourage Goldberg to stay away, Bischoff has booked a rematch between Goldberg and Rick Steiner for Starrcade, and the match will be no holds barred. Tenay then talks about Sean O'Haire and breaks the news that unfortunately Sean O'Haire will be out of action for an indefinite period following a bad break to his ankle, and therefore he will not be around for a little bit of time. In reality, this is a story to cover for the fact that Sean O'Haire is going off, and has now gone off in fact, to fight or train for an MMA fight and I've been told that he's going to be doing that for the next 4 months. So we don't have access to him for a little while, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way this game goes sometimes. Mike Tenay then introduces Tony Schiavone, who has stood in the ring to conduct an interview. And Tony Schiavone thanks the fans in Connecticut for being in attendance for tonight's episode of Nitro, and then says that tonight's main event will be Team Canada versus Sting and Ric Flair, with the winners receiving a tag team title shot against Totally Buff at Starrcade. Schiavone then introduces his guest at this time, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Flair comes out and Schiavone asks him why he helped Sting last week on Nitro. Flair says that he wasn't prepared to stand in the back and watch Sting stand alone against Team Canada, especially given that Sting had helped him out when he was in a jam against the Steiner brothers earlier this year. Schiavone says that the last time they spoke to Sting about Flair, he made it clear that he didn't trust Flair. Flair says that nothing has changed since then. He and Sting aren't close, they don't talk, and he's not expecting Sting to be the best man at his next wedding, but last week was about repaying a debt. Schiavone then asks how Flair is feeling now that the pair are set to be teamed together tonight, and if they win, they will face Totally Buff for the tag team titles. Flair says he's not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. This is his and Sting's chance to be in a major title match at Starrcade. He says that they've actually had some good results in tag competition previously, and he thinks that they can continue that success tonight. So a segment rating here only of 64. Flair has been masterful in terms of his matches, but his angles and his interviews have not been at the same quality. So I don't really know why that is. We are in Connecticut, and I'm wondering whether that will affect a lot of ratings over the course of this night, because Connecticut is one of the places where we are lacking a little bit in popularity. Not massively so, not in a huge way, but just a tiny bit. And also some of the wrestlers have not been as exposed in this market as they have been in other markets. So it might be interesting to see if that is affecting the ratings in general today for these segments. The first match of the night is Eddie Guerrero versus Johnny Swinger in Eddie Guerrero's return match to WCW. The commentators note that this is the first match he's had in WCW in almost exactly 2 years. Eddie Guerrero gets the victory in 6 minutes and 55 seconds by pinfall. A segment rating here of 53. Eddie Guerrero's in-ring performance was a 62, which is really decent and shows that if we put some time and effort into him, he will be very quickly one of the best performers in the company. And Johnny Swinger had an in-ring performance of 23. To add to all that, Guerrero and Swinger just didn't click at all, and it showed in their performance. So that was the performance was offset by that as well. Eddie Guerrero getting a regulation victory on his debut back in WCW. Following the match, Guerrero is celebrating his victory when the Jarrett administration, Jeff Jarrett, John Cena, Mike Sanders and Brian Armstrong run to the ring and attack him. They are closely followed, however, by the Filthy Animals, Conan, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Billy Kidman, and a wild 8-man brawl takes place as the show goes to break. So this got a segment rating of 57. Everyone looked pretty decent here except for John Cena. And yes, the story between these two factions continues. The next match is a match between KroniK and the Windham brothers. This is obviously a bit of a grudge match. These two teams have been in a feud for a little while. And in about that had a decent reaction from the crowd, but subpar wrestling. KroniK defeated the Windham brothers in 11 minutes and 20 seconds when Brian Adams pinned Barry Windham. The segment rating here 51, Clark a 47, Adams a 53, Kendall Windham a 43, Barry Windham a 37. And the fact that Windham's been getting poor performances since his return to WCW is probably the reason I had him take the pinfall in this. I just feel like Windham's definitely come to the end of his any real value he had, which I'm not that surprised by. I mean, obviously this was after Windham's WWF run where he wasn't particularly strong in sort of 97 and 1998, so I wasn't surprised, but I thought we'd take a gamble on him. But since he's come in, he hasn't really done much, and so the Windham brothers just add to our kind of division of tag teams, but I'm not expecting to do major things with them going forward, and this was just a way to pay off the KroniK Windham brothers feud in some ways. So next, backstage, Sharma Sullivan introduces the FBI as her guests for an interview. Sullivan asks them what they got wrong at Uncensored that led to them losing their Cruiserweight tag team titles to Air Raid. James Maritato says they got nothing wrong and that the referee was clearly in the pocket of their opponents. Sullivan asks if Maritato is claiming there is corruption at the heart of World Championship Wrestling. Maritato says that it goes deeper than she could ever know, and he says that to truly ensure the FBI aren't the champions, WCW hasn't even booked them in the mini-tournament to determine the first challengers to Air Raid. Maritato says they were robbed of the belts and it was an inside job. WCW, the Championship Committee, Eric Bischoff, and even Brian Bedell were in on it. So a segment rating here of 36, not a particularly good performance from either Sharmell or James Maritato, but significant for one reason and one reason only, really, and that is that this is the first time Brian Bedell has actually been, I believe, mentioned on screen in this new WCW. Brian Bedell, obviously, for those who may have forgotten, is the owner of WCW in the game anyway. Next, we had Jester up against Jim Duggan, with Jim Duggan about to go for his 3-point stance clothesline. Vampiro tripped him, and Prodigy took advantage, hitting a Uranage to defeat Duggan. This one lasted 8 minutes 41 seconds. A good rating here of 62, and Jester a performance of 57, Jim Duggan a 46. A good boost of a victory for Jester, and I must keep reminding myself that actually Jester is a pretty talented guy, at least in terms of the game, and we should probably be using him a little bit more regularly with a little bit more importance than we are up to this point. Next, we had another vignette for the not yet debuted Vigilante. Of course, Vigilante, as I said on the previous week's episode, is the former Wall. His first vignette took place on Saturday night last week, but we thought we'd give him a vignette on Nitro as well to just sort of expose him to as many people as possible. In this one, it sees him walking through a ghetto and then through a plush hotel with different types of people and different things going on around him. And then in the video, the Vigilante talks direct to camera and compares the dirt poor with the filthy rich and asks if this is justice. So a segment rating here of 33, not too bad, and the Vigilante is gradually kind of being introduced to the crowd. Next, Rick Steiner took on Ernest Miller, and during the match, Steiner plays up to the crowd as they boo him for his actions on last week's show. Steiner gets the victory here in 7 minutes and 33 seconds by pinfall, a segment rating of 65, which is really decent, and Rick Steiner a performance of 71, which is one of the best performances he's had actually since the beginning of the game. So I'm wondering if this Goldberg feud for him is really kind of motivating him in terms of, getting him up for performing. So he gets a big victory here against Ernest Miller, and just a way of us kind of keeping the Goldberg Rick Steiner feud fresh in people's minds. So I'm getting some pop-ups here. I'm sorry if you see them as this game goes on. Next, Tony Schiavone introduces DDP for an interview backstage. Schiavone asks DDP where his head is at after losing in his match with Booker T at Uncensored. DDP says that he's not out here complaining, the better man won, and Booker T is a deserving world champion. Before Schiavone can ask him anything else, they are interrupted by Kanyon and Bam Bam Bigelow. Kanyon tells DDP that he's pathetic out here groveling to the WCW champion, a man he could have beaten if it had taken them up on their offer of help. DDP says he doesn't run with losers like them and isn't interested in winning the WCW title that way. Kanyon tells DDP that he may not realize it now, but one day, long after he has retired, he's going to regret not taking them up on the offer because he'll never win another world title in his career. DDP tells Kanyon that he's not really very interested in what he thinks, but would be happy to face him in a match next week, and Kanyon accepts the challenge and he and Bigelow walk away. So segment rating here of 67. The DDP and Kanyon and Bigelow kind of interaction continues and will result in a match on Nitro next week, with them kind of telling DDP that he could have won the world title if he'd accepted the help that they'd offered him last month. Next, we have a rare women's match on Nitro. It's a 6-man tag match. It sees Alexis Lurie, Angel Orsini, and Jillian Hall take on Amber O'Neil, Jazz, and Cara Slice. During the match, the commentators promote that the women's round robin is in its final round over the course of December, and that either Jazz or Angel Orsini will be the first WCW Women's Champion as the round robin concludes. The winners here were Lurie, Orsini, and Hall when Orsini pinned Cara Slice. This one got a segment rating of only 20, which was a shame. I was hoping this would go a little bit better. Orsini got a 29, Alexis Lurie a 30, Cara Slice a 20, Jazz a 27, so that wasn't too bad. So the people that performed here are the people that I'm hoping to move forward with in this women's division. We've clearly sort of singled out Alexis Lurie, Kana, Angel Orsini, and Jazz as the sort of 4 main sort of important people to come out of this round robin, and that definitely seems to be the case as we've gone through, and they are the better performers. So we're at a point where when we finish the women's round robin, I think we're into the next phase of what the women's division is going to be, and I think we're going to base it around those four and potentially start to bring in some new talent as well to sort of augment that division. I don't know whether the other four who are in the round robin will be kept around, but if they are, it will be mainly probably for them to do jobs and stuff like that. But we'll see as things progress. But certainly we've got the four wrestlers, as I say, Jazz, Laree, Orsini, and Kanu, who's not in this match, who seem to be the ones that we're most kind of moving forward with. So next we have Bobby Roode coming to the ring and asking for his open challenge for the night to be revealed, and it turns out to be Jamie Noble. So segment rating here just of 27 to set up the next match. That is Bobby Roode versus Jamie Noble, the open challenge match, and Bobby Roode gets the victory in a bout that had subpar wrestling and little heat, and he beat Jamie Noble in 8 minutes and 7 seconds by submission after blatantly cheating. So you can see here Jamie Noble actually had an in-ring performance of 52, and he's being underutilized, I think, a fair bit given that particular rating. Bobby Roode of 35. We're trying to give him matches that will get the crowd invested in him. A segment rating only of 39 though shows that they're not really invested in him despite the victories he's having. So we're gonna pursue this a bit further, but I think we're getting to a point where we might have to call it because he's not quite getting there yet. Maybe we just need to spend a bit more time on it. So next up, Tony Schiavone stood in the ring again, and this time welcomes Booker T for an interview. Once Booker T is in the ring, Schiavone asks him what his reaction is to what Scott Steiner said last week about Booker T ducking his challenge since the relaunch of WCW in May. Booker T says he understands why Steiner would feel that way. He says that he doesn't know what is going on between Steiner and WCW management, but he has been asking all year for a rematch with Steiner, but they kept telling him no. He says he's relieved, if he wants to be honest about it, that Steiner won the Starrcade series because now it gives him the chance to remove the question mark after his name as WCW champion. He then says that he has a message for Scott Steiner now that the match is set. He says that he doesn't want Steiner to step between those ropes between now and Starrcade. He doesn't want Steiner to pick up an injury or get fatigued or do anything that could give him an excuse after the bout. He says he wants Steiner at his absolute best, fully fit, all engines go, because after Starrcade is done, he wants nobody in any doubt about him as the WCW World Champion. Now, can you dig that, sucker? A segment rating here of 70. Tony Schiavone looked dreadful apparently, but Booker T was fantastic. We're really sort of laying the groundwork with these angles between Booker T and Steiner for their match at Starrcade. We may go a little bit light on this in terms of making it too heavy heading into Starrcade. I feel like we've been running the story really since the beginning of the series in general, so I don't feel like we have to go too hard on it. People know the history, people know that Steiner's been trying to get a title shot all year, people know that Booker T hasn't exactly been ducking him, but WCW have just not been setting up the match, and we're heading to Starrcade with that as the main event. And the night's main event is Team Canada versus Ric Flair and Sting in a match for the number one contendership to the WCW Tag Team titles. And Ric Flair gets the win for his team when an errant Lance Storm chair shot gets Awesome instead of its intended target, and Flair pins the US champion. So Ric Flair wins this one for his team with a surprise cradle over Mike Awesome. 22 minutes and 25 seconds this one lasted and got a segment rating of 79. And looking at those in-ring performances, look who was the top performer, Lance Storm. He has been excellent just recently, and I'm not really sure why, because it's not like we've been giving him an extra push as of late. He's been largely all year really been playing second fiddle to Mike Awesome within that team. Awesome obviously the US champion. Awesome had a 78, Flair a 77, Sting an 80, but a very decent match nonetheless. A 79 for this match, a good main event and a great way to end Nitro, which will certainly mean that this show was a success, increased our popularity in 10 regions, and an overall rating of 72. I always knew when I was sort of setting this up, this was going to be a much less high-profile show than the previous one. The last one really felt like there was lots going on. This one, the matches in general, were of a much lower level of interest. But I felt confident with that main event that we'd still be able to deliver the way we need to in order to continue to increase our popularity. So I'm happy with the results we've got out of this one. Okay, I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's do WCW Saturday Night as well. So we've got 3,080 people in the Oakdale Theatre for this TV taping, which is not bad given that in this region we are a lower popularity than we are most places. The opening match is AJ Styles versus Teddy Hart in a bout that had subpar wrestling and little heat. AJ Styles defeated Teddy Hart in 6 minutes 46 seconds by pinfall. This got a segment rating of 48, AJ Styles an in-ring performance of 53 and Teddy Hart a 33. Interestingly, AJ Styles is a gimmick that is getting stale, which is definitely something I'll need to think about as we continue on with AJ Styles. And yeah, an in-ring performance there, 53, showing that he's maintaining a relatively high level of performance at the moment, and that the performance he had at Uncensored was no fluke. So a decent match here. Next up, the commentators throw to the back where they say an incident is taking place, and it soon turns out that the Headhunters and Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk are engaged in a wild brawl where it appears all four men are already bleeding. Officials attempt to keep them apart but cannot, and so shepherd the brawl out of the building where the camera can no longer follow them. This got a segment rating of 44 and continued on this feud between the Headhunters, Nick Gage, Tommy Dreamer and Terry Funk. In the next match, Brian Armstrong made his singles debut in WCW and he defeated Aaron Stevens, who of course you will maybe know better as Damien Sandow. Of course, he is this is a long time before he would become Damien Sandow, and he's just playing the role of jobber here. Armstrong wins in 6:49 by pinfall, a segment rating of 38, but that was largely down to Aaron Stevens not really being of any real quality, although 24 is not bad for someone that nobody knows about. They had great chemistry as well, these two, and Brian Armstrong an in-ring performance of 50, which is decent enough for me. I didn't expect huge things from Armstrong, so I'm happy with where we are with him. Then Sharmell Sullivan welcomes Chavo Guerrero Jr. backstage for an interview. She says that on Monday Nitro next week, Chavo will face Shane Helms and Billy Kidman in a three-way match to determine the new Cruiserweight title #1 contender, and asks Chavo for his thoughts ahead of that match. Chavo says that it is his chance to book a place at Starrcade and he does not intend to miss it. Sharmell asks him what he makes of his two opponents, and Chavo says he has been in the ring with both of them and says he knows their weaknesses and he will exploit those weaknesses on Monday. Sharmell finishes by asking what Chavo's reaction is to his uncle Eddie returning to WCW after 2 years away, and Chavo says he doesn't want to talk about that and then walks off. So a segment rating here of 31. Chavo Guerrero Jr. struggled when going off script. Nothing very impressive here, but just some time filler and a way to hype the triple threat match that's taking place on Nitro to determine the next #1 contender to the Cruiserweight title. The next contest saw Kana against Ronnie Stevens in the women's title round robin. Kana's record going in was 3 wins, 2 losses and a draw with 10 points, and Stevens had 2 wins, 4 losses and 6 points, and Stevens lost again here with Kana winning in 7 minutes and 12 seconds by submission. An abysmal match, unfortunately. Segment rating of 21, but you can see there Kana's in-ring performance at 33 and Ronnie Stevens only an 18, and I think this just speaks further to what I was saying earlier on about the 4 women in the division that I think we're going to pursue in terms of going forward and giving them something to do, whilst the other 4 will largely work as fodder for them or potentially also be released depending on kind of what we do with them over the next couple of weeks and months. Immediately following the match, Alexis Lurie comes to the ring and says that they have unfinished business and challenges Kana to a rematch. Kana responds by nodding her head. So a segment rating here of 23. Alexis Lurie worked the crowd well as well. So I'm pretty happy with that. These two kind of staying in their feud, and apparently a rematch between the two is imminent. Then the main event of the night is another match in the mini tournament to name the new #1 contenders to the Cruiserweight Tag Team title. This is semi-final number 2, and here the great Sasuke and Kaz Hayashi defeat 3 count in 30 minutes and 8 seconds when Hayashi pins Shannon Moore. Segment rating here 55, largely down to the great Sasuke's performance, which was a 74, though Hayashi also had a 53. So these two are a pretty strong team in terms of their quality, and they will go through to the final of this tournament and face Kid Romeo and Elix Skipper on Nitro next week. And it also says here that Sasuke and Hayashi showed excellent chemistry teaming together. I believe Hayashi was part of Michinoko Pro, which obviously is great Sasuke's promotion, and so they certainly that certainly carried through here. A really decent main event to end the night. But that wasn't quite the end of the show, because straight after the match, the Headhunters and Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer are continuing their brawl, and they brawl back into the arena and towards the ring. Eventually, Eric Bischoff comes out on the stage with all four men being held back, and he announces that the two teams will face one another in a match on Nitro next week. So segment rating here 51, as the sort of brawl and the feud between these two teams continues, and Bischoff announces another match for Nitro next week. So quite a bit of stuff announced for Nitro next week, which is a good job given how little was announced for this week's show. Overall, not bad, but again, it's Saturday night. It doesn't mean too much. And we are through another episode of both Nitro and Saturday Night, and we're now just 2 weeks away, ultimately, from Starrcade, the big show at the end of the year for WCW. WCW's version, I guess, of WrestleMania. Let's just have a look and see what happened on Raw this week. So you can see a show rating of 91. The main event, though, The Rock versus Goldust, 99 rated that match. And that's the kind of difficulty we've got in terms of challenging or competing with WWE, although they have put the tag team titles on the APA, who've beaten Edge and Christian in a cage match for those tag team titles, and Hulk Hogan beat Christopher Daniels. Daniels was an early target for us, which we were unable to get because WWF signed him. So Kevin Nash beating Steve Blackman as well. Scott Hall beating Brock Lesnar, so they've debuted Lesnar onto the main roster already, which is interesting. Who are the Lady Killers who defeated Right to Censor here? That is Finley and Juventud Guerrera are the Lady Killers. That's an interesting team. 91? Is that right? A 91? It said, did I see that then? No, 69. It says show rating 91. Okay, no, match rating was a 69. Okay, fine. So, pretty big and impressive episode of Raw is War, in fairness, this week. Way better than our show in terms of its overall rating. But again, no big deal. We've continued to improve upon our popularity, and we are happy with what we've got from that show. So yeah, as I said, 2 weeks out from Starrcade now. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. And if you want to continue to follow along with the series, give us a follow. There is, of course, the playlist with all the episodes in this series that you can go through if you so wish, and you've just started watching us. Until next time, though, thank you very much for watching.